My name is Edward Carnby. I am of the rare sort of profession known as a paranormal investigator. Many regard what I do as the work of quacks and lunatics, but the many things I have seen in my line of work is very, very real. I tell you the events I am relaying of that of Dercito Manor on the night of the early mornings of October 5th and 6th of 1921 are ones that when you hear them will defy scientific explanation. But I left the manor with proof of the events that occurred that night. But I also left a very, very changed man. It is best that I start about the events of that evening from the beginning. I was told to investigate Dercito Manor when its former inhabitant, Jeremy Hartwood, had hung himself a month prior. After the long string of mysterious deaths in the manor and around its property, I was asked by the local authorities to investigate, hoping I would get to the bottom of the events that have led to these mysterious deaths. The house, I was told at this point, is completely uninhabited. I spent the night of the 4th poring over the files and reports at the inn just 10 miles down the road, mentally preparing myself for what I might see. Little did I know, I was very unprepared still. Even reading the report, such a house of death seemed no different than other various homes I've investigated that have had malevolent spirits the church was able to exorcise. I spent the night sipping a favorite vintage of brandy I particularly enjoyed. Anyone who is not in my line of work might be intimidated by the various grotesqueries that had been committed to the page of the goings-on in this manor. Aside from the death of Jeremy Hartwood, the manor itself was on the holy ground of a native tribe that had been killed by settlers who had built there. I was lingering on those reports, haunted by the last words of my late wife, Sarah. I'll never forget what she always told me. "Is this what you want?" She would always ask me. Why she emphasized the you perhaps made her question have multiple meanings. Sarah died of diphtheria. At the end she was delirious. Even then, she asked me that. I obviously didn't want that, so why she asked was beyond me, even as my tears never stopped flowing the night she passed. I've begun to believe there must be some kind of scientific explanation for my endeavors, but what kind of god would take a woman like her too soon? And just 2 years before the vaccine came about, my life has never been the same. Sarah was my life, a font of wisdom when all that fills my head is knowledge. I would cry that night. Rather, I would have. But I have already cried enough for my lifetime. I take another drink before I lie down to sleep in the rickety cot of the ramshackle hotel, waking up bright and early to catch my chartered cabbie to the manor, the humid, hot Louisiana breeze passing by my face as we turned from the paved road to the pounded dirt road towards the manor. The cabbie said, in a rather gruff but foreboding tone, "I would take care if I was you, sir. Ain't nobody come out of that house alive." Committed, I said. "I'm aware. It's why I'm here." As my eyes fixed themselves to the turn-up to the manor, it stood almost untouched in the middle of a mangrove swamp, the road muddy but still navigable as we drove to the roundabout driveway. The cabbie said, "All right, sir. I'll be back tomorrow morning. These roads get flooded at night, and I don't want to get stuck here." As I exited and approached the stoop, I remembered to offer the cabbie a tip for his efforts. I opened my billfold, handing him $2, saying, "There's 2 more if you're back here in 12 hours as agreed." He took the bills and said, "Of course, sir. May I say? God watch over you, sir." He peeled out. Almost seemingly fate, that water began to fill the road behind him. I approached the door, the soft croaking of evening frogs and crickets. I could have sworn I even heard the trill of an alligator as I walked up the stairs. I could have also sworn I felt several eyes on me as I reached into my pocket, pulling out the very old copper key that opened the front door, the tumblers sounding rusty as I turned them. Opening the door as I took a look inside of this dilapidated manor, the air smelled sour, the smell of death still lingering in the air, almost far longer than it should have been. Scant evening sunlight entered the windows, a stiff breeze heard outside. The inside of this enormous manor, as quiet as the many graveyards I've investigated. I knew night would soon be upon me. I decided to take the time to get my bearings and have some exits in mind, should I not be alone in this manor. I walked towards the kitchen, only my footsteps being heard throughout the halls. It almost seemed like the scant sunlight was leaving as I made my way towards the back rooms of the manor, positive that some of the rooms I would pass would be dining rooms, and sure enough, I came to the kitchen. My assessment was right, but naturally, as is the case with several other haunted homes I've been forced to spend a night in, I didn't feel alone. With the setting sun, I knew I would need to set up something of a safe room, as well as fill my stomach with what I could, the meager breakfast at the hotel I had soon waning away. I didn't hold out a lot of hope, but I knew if I was going to make it the rest of the night, I would need some more food to help me get through it. Oftentimes, with late-night stays, some food would always help me, not only help my mind stay clear, but awake and alert as well. As I opened the swinging door to the kitchen, dust hadn't yet taken many of the utensils. But the question is, how much of the food was devoured by rats? I opened the door to the larder, a pungent smell entering my nose as I looked in the corner. Some sort of strange mold, likely the source of the smell. But how quickly mold had taken here when Jeremy Hartwood, by all account, was still living in the home at least 2 weeks prior was certainly a mystery. Even homes that had been abandoned for decades hadn't yet had mold take in certain rooms. All I knew was that any exposed food would be ruined. I checked the shelves for any closed foodstuffs. Very little there. Some saltine crackers, a tin of anchovies, a jar of dried herbs, and a closed sack of potatoes. All but 2 absolutely covered in that mold. Being something of a survivalist, I managed to come up with an idea for a soup. With a few pieces of firewood left for the stove, I made the process of a rather salty but somewhat seasoned potato soup. I clapped my hands free of the ash while the soup was boiling. I decided to illuminate the kitchen, finding an oil lamp and some matches to do so while the soup continued to cook. I searched the kitchen for any clues and found something peculiar next to one of the cookbooks. A ragged, leather-bound journal left unlocked. It seemed to stand out among a series of hardback cookbooks, so I opened it and found that it was a servant's diary. I found several pages torn out, but the pages that were legible revealed where my search would begin in terms of clues what might have led to Jeremy Hartwood's suicide. The servant mentioned how Hartwood would oftentimes take several trips from the attic to the basement, the moving of a chest and wardrobe up there, being asked by him to move them back almost every other morning. As I read, however, I heard a pitter-pattering in the hallway. I quickly grabbed the oil lamp and opened the door to the kitchen, holding it open to a dark hallway. Nothing. Nothing but a ever-increasing darkness. The sun was now completely down. The house was as dark as soot. Once again, that feeling of not being alone starting to dawn on me again. But soon enough, my soup was ready. I found some old rags to set it as I poured the soup in a bowl with a cracked edge as I allowed it to cool, while looking for some more clues in the kitchen. Nothing else for now. I quickly slurped down the bowl, chewing the softened potatoes and quickly wiping any spillage off my red beard. All the while poring through the diary, deciding how in the dead of night I will explore this house of death. All the while, a feeling of mild dread filling me. I couldn't help but feel that someone, or something, was just outside the dim kitchen light, waiting for me. I placed the diary in my knapsack, before taking out a shred of parchment to record my own observations about the manor, the dustiness, the constant feeling of dread, knowing physically I was alone, but I didn't feel truly alone. After that, and the house had now entered a veil of darkness, I lit the lamp once more, its dim light just barely illuminating my path as I opened the creaking kitchen door, walking back down the hall, then up the stairs, my every step echoing throughout the halls. Normally, the darkness of even some of the most haunted homes I've been in was something that could be alleviating by lighting several lamps and candles. However, I lit several candles and lamps on the newel caps of the stairs, and the darkness had only slightly abated. All the while, the feelings of dread had not. My heart seemed to race around every corner. It confused me. A house like this had been like so many I had been in over the years. Something stirring within the darkness of this home was giving me a sort of unique feeling of unease. Soon I found the door to the attic. Taking in my memory of when I approached the house, I remember where this would be in relation. That one room at the top of the manor. And then something I remembered that I didn't realize. Did I see someone in the window of that room? Did I? Is that where the feeling of not being alone came from? I was asking all this of myself, wondering, stalling more like. That feeling that the door to this room was a threshold. I reached it and turned the handle. A thin stairwell to the room, small candle cisterns for the way up. As I walked and stopped to light them on the way, once again to increase the meager amount of light available to me, something once again felt off. As I walked up the stairs, I could have sworn I heard a second step. I heard a second set of footsteps behind me. The door in sight after an abrupt turn in the stairs. I turned to see nothing behind me. I continue my way up the stairs. The second set of steps no longer behind me as I turned to the door of the attic. Like every door in this home, an ungodly creak sounded. The attic seemed unremarkable like any other, but I felt if only a granule of relief when I realized there was no one up here, at least that I could see. I looked up at the beams, however, and immediately noticed the looped rope around it. The method of how Mr. Hartwood had committed suicide indeed. I needed to get a better look. I didn't know it at the time, but the simple act of moving a chest under the noose loop to give me a better look very well might have saved my life that night. I stepped atop the chest to take a look at the rope. It appears to have snapped and was not cut. I began to contemplate what had happened, how the rope had snapped. Heartwood would have been hanging for quite some time. Heartwood would have had to have been hanging for quite some time. Suddenly, the chest beneath me felt like it slammed from underneath. It was so hard and jarring, it nearly made me fall off. I looked down to feel a second bash against it. Aggressive, like someone was trying to get out of the chest. I stepped off, and did notice it was unlocked. But as soon as I did, there were no more bashes on it. I noticed the floor wasn't completely flush. A plank was sticking out. I quickly moved the chest aside, and noticed that there was a trap door. I pulled the trap door open and nothing. And by that I don't mean a floor, I mean nothingness. A near bottomless pit. I listened closely. I could have sworn I heard a splash of water. The trap door must lead to far below the basement. The pit was dark, much like the rest of the manor before I lit the candles. I closed the trapdoor, deciding I would find a way to get to the basement, and having had enough of this attic. But first checking the chest for any further clues, I found yet another key, as well as a flintlock pistol. Intriguing, to say the least. An interesting trophy, if nothing else. I packed what I could before deciding to head to the central hallway and simply start testing which door the key goes to. I opened the door to the stairwell. Every last candle in the cisterns was out. Every last one. There are no windows in that stairwell. I was now very certain I wasn't alone in this home. I held the lantern up, my footsteps echoing down as I walked down the dark stairwell, now tempted to look behind me. But I remembered every experience I ever had in a haunted house, not to give in to the spirits that might be taunting you. I took a long, deep breath and continued, walking back into the hallway to where naturally it was pitch dark. Not even moonlight, only the light of my lantern. So far, while it was naturally unnerving, it wasn't too different from other hauntings I had experienced. I needed to get to the bottom of this, both what happened and the house in question. I needed to find the basement. I walked further throughout the house to determine what door the key I just found unlocked. Once again, my lantern my only source of light as I walked through this dark abode. My footsteps creaking on the floorboards, I came to a long hallway that had about 8 doors. The bedrooms, washroom, and a utility closet. I searched every one, finding meager clues and supplies, and even a few shots for the pistol in my now arsenal that included my holy water, the good book itself, and 2 pockets full of rock salt, and my field knife. I'm finding a veritable rain of keys at this point. All the while, a foreboding feeling and growing more intense as I opened the last door. Gripping the handle, a feeling of dread washed over me. But once again, the rational part of my brain attempted to tell me, this is part of the process, do your job. As I opened the door, entering what appeared to be a powder room, someone sitting in front of the mirror in a chair, illuminated by what little moonlight there was. My heart dropped. As I saw what was sitting in the chair wasn't a person, but a silhouette. I shined the lantern towards it. It was in the shape of a person, a woman in a dress, wearing a feather hat. She turned her head to look at me. There wasn't eyes, but two red-hot, glowing embers where the eyes should be. The room grew cold as she came towards me. I have seen apparitions before, but not ones like this. Not ones that came at me with what I knew was an intent to kill. I turned and closed the door to the room, laying a line of salt down as I backed away. So much before I realized my back hit the other wall, the door being slammed with moans and groans before it settled, and so did my breath. I took a few moments to compose myself. I checked my watch, the picture of my Sarah just on the outside. I had realized I had only been in this manor for just over an hour, and yet it felt like nearly the whole night had passed. I turned to face the corridor to see a handle to a door I hadn't seen yet. This door, it seemed, was extra, a ninth door? But I knew I had to open it. I turned the handle, and I was home again. No, I recognized the sunset all too well, just outside the window. This was my carpet, my foyer. Everything. All on that fateful day. I turned the corner to see my wife on her deathbed. Even with sunken eyes and emaciated, she still looked as beautiful as ever in my eyes. Suddenly passing through me was me. I was reliving it all over again, only in silence. I was next to her, on her deathbed, holding her nigh-on skeletal hand. I saw myself mouthing words, but I knew what I said. Followed by her last words. They were in silence, but I knew what she said. However, my focus on that was derailed when I saw something equally skeletal in the corner of the room. It was shriveled, teeth exposed, and then its eyes shot open. It began shambling towards me, arms out as it passed through the now dissolving vision of that day. My resolve, I will admit, was weakened, but I clenched my fist, knowing my job, as I lunged a kick at this zombie as it groaned and shambled backwards. I gave enough force to kick down a door, but it got up and kept coming towards me. I gave several more kicks before it was down. I looked around the room. It was a bedroom that I was in earlier, that I had already checked. Was this house alive? Was it deceiving me? I shook my head now, reached into my pocket now to rub the smooth gold of my watch, keeping myself grounded to the situation. I took a deep breath, my mind still on what had just happened, but my eyes sliding to the carpet underneath the decrepit, tattered bed. I saw something brazen. It was yet another key. It must be to the rooms on the next floor down, across from the kitchen. Those were the only rooms left I hadn't searched. I reached down and put my key in my pocket. Once again. I reached down and put the key in my pocket, once again catching my breath. Kneeling down to examine the zombie I just killed, ready to crush its head should it come back to life. It was no one I recognized from the files. To think this is what the Heartwoods had been up to. But I had to be ready. I stood and headed downstairs, all the while through the dark corridors of the mansion, now filled with dark whispers. Kill him. Steal his I grit my teeth. I knew what they meant by that last one. I had to strengthen my resolve. The house was trying to break me. I checked the flintlock pistol I had. 2 shots in the barrel, and 10 bearings for a few more shots. I readied it in the event I needed it. I moved to a long corridor before one double door, and a smaller door. The smaller door on the left appeared blocked, partially by some kind of tarp, although it appeared as if something was beneath the tarp. I felt the smaller door was the one to the basement, more than likely, which is where I needed to go. I approached the tarp, gripped the tattered fabric, and pulled it aside. Suddenly, my stomach was sliced. I grunted and jumped back. Before me, clearly some kind of zombie like the last one I faced. Its skin stretched tight, its teeth exposed, but its hair long, and wearing pirate's garb. I clutched my bleeding wound as I stumbled back. The zombie now stood, now clutching to a bloody cutlass. And to my surprise, I say he because of the nappy, maggot-infested beard that barely clung to his decayed chin. As well as his voice, he said in a pirate voice, "You're trying to take me treasure, lad. I don't think so." As he shambled towards me, I quickly drew the flintlock pistol and fired the first shot as it hit the pirate's shoulder. But he kept coming as he groaned out, "You're gonna have to do better than that, lad." I fired the next shot, but this time he simply swung his cutlass and deflected the shot. I couldn't believe this. I grunted and still clutched my wound as I began thinking of what to do. I reached into my pocket and tossed out a line of salt quickly. He stopped as I kept backing up towards the corridor, but he simply jumped over it. It seemed no matter what I had on me, he had something to counter. As I backed up, I passed a suit of armor, clutching a sword as well. It seemed my attempt at holy warfare and modern warfare had failed. I looked around and grasped the sword, holding it up, pushing through the pain of my wound as blood dripped to the floor. I decided to slow him down with another line of salt, as I pulled out my knife and tore off my sleeve, quickly wrapping it around my midsection to stem the bleeding. I huffed and puffed as I kept the sword up defensively. He once again jumped over my line and said, "Gonna have to face me, lad, if ye want my treasure." But I knew reasoning with him was out of the question. I began a sword fight with him. A rather clumsy, rudimentary sword fight. Myself from being a mortal man that didn't know much about sword fighting. Him from being a walking corpse. The fight crashed through the halls, our swords tearing apart the walls. I couldn't let him land another blow on me. It would be much more fatal. But I did my best to slash him apart. Soon enough, and whether through persistence, I finished him back at where his corridor began. My breathing was shallow and heavy. I slumped against the wall, drenched in sweat, my ears ringing as I wiped some blood from my head on my sleeve. During all this, he did manage to land one slight blow near my ear in the midst of it all. As I lay against the wall as the ringing slowed down, my own breathing quieted, I seemed to hear something, like music. It was faint at first, but then became more apparent of what kind. The kind you would hear during a waltz. The kind of music my father listened to from his gramophone. I stood up and remembered the house was trying to break me, and I wouldn't fall for it. I saw it coming from the room with the double doors, but went straight for the room the pirate zombie was guarding, and of course, it was locked. I turned to face the double doors, the music coming from behind them. From what I had faced so far, I thought I was ready for anything. I was wrong. I opened them, and it was a ballroom that had come to life, fully lit, people dancing about in full regalia, the music now louder. I was utterly perplexed and felt out of place being so disheveled. I looked around. Everyone was masked. I couldn't tell who they were, and they didn't seem to pay me any mind. I shambled through the ballroom, trying to keep in mind that the house was trying to break me. But this was on a whole other level. I was in complete whiplash. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I couldn't believe it. It couldn't be. But I'd recognize her hair anywhere. And she was wearing the dress that I met her in. It was just like that one night, only I was better dressed at the time. I approached her, my heart racing. I softly croaked, "Sarah?" She turned, her face vibrant and full of life. She smiled at me and simply held out her hand, simply saying with her clever smile, "Care to dance?" I wanted to cry. I wanted to embrace her. But all I could do was get lost in the moment, and even see if I could feel her. I reached out for her hand. It was real. It was warm. It felt like her. Instinctively, I began dancing in lockstep with her, lost in her beautiful brown eyes. We danced for I don't know how long, but it was as if I had her again. I didn't care if I knew this couldn't be real, because I watched her breathe her last breaths. I watched her die. And yet, here she was, right in front of me, dancing away just as if we were teenagers again. And just as then, I was still in love with her. As the waltz calmed, I danced more slowly with her. I finally had to say something more. I said, "I've missed you so much. Why did you have to leave me?" Sarah shook her head with her characteristic laugh as she said, "Silly man, I never left you. I'm always with you." She laid her head on my chest. I embraced her, as I wanted. I had her in my arms again. But while on some level, I knew she couldn't come with me, I knew I needed to leave the mansion. After the embrace lasted for the longest time, I leaned out, holding her in my arms as I said, "Sarah, my love, we need to get out of here. This house, there's something wrong." Her eyes then changed from their beautiful amber brown to a pure, dark, hellish black, as she said, "Oh, but dear, don't you want this forever? To be with me forever?" I shook. I knew deep in the depths of my soul that's what I wanted more than anything. I muttered out, "You know I do." Sarah then stepped back, holding her hand out, as she said, "Then come with me, and we can be together, forever." As now the entire ballroom had taken notice of me, staring at me. I noticed, behind their masks, eyes without pupils, just pure white, just like the zombie I had faced in the mansion. I wanted to be with Sarah, of course. But With great strength, I fought against my every last heart's desire. It felt like ripping my own heart out. As I took a deep breath, strengthened my resolve, and said flatly, "No." Suddenly the room shook, as the lamp shattered, the room becoming dark, the dancers fading away one by one in the darkness. Before me, my beloved Sarah changed, her arms growing long and gangly, her hands long and jagged, her eyes sunken into nothing, just two black pits, her beautiful black hair now shriveling to the consistency of straw. What stood before me wasn't my wife, but some kind of monster. Its voice a mix of hers, as the dress she was wearing tore, the beast, now with jagged teeth, stepping forward, sprouting a tail, as this beast wore part of her voice like a skin suit, saying, "Silly man! Now you die!" As the beast leapt atop me, wrapping its hands around my neck as I kicked my legs on the ground, attempting to get a breath of air. I was trying to remember what, if anything, I could do in this situation. My hands felt around, desperately on the ground, as I felt I was surely going to die. When I felt salty sand, no, salt, in my hand, I grunted and desperately threw my last pocketful of salt that I had fallen out of my pocket into the beast's eyes. It screeched, "Curse you! Curse you, Edward Garnby!" As the beast staggered back, its face burning away, I took a desperate breath of air. As I fumbled around in my jacket, I felt around for the flintlock pistol and my cross. I held up the cross as I yelled, "Stay back! Stay back, beast!" As it hissed at me, keeping its distance as I quickly loaded my flintlock pistol. The beast hissed out as I could see its skull now, deformed, misshapen, as it still said, "You will win, Edward Carnby! You will die in the lair of the Master!" It lunged at me before I fired both shots. It then lay on the ground, dead. I took a deep breath of relief. The horror over, at least for now. I could only imagine the Master referred to whoever was in the basement. I didn't care who it was. I had to finish this. I cleaned up and dressed my wounds, noticing the now gold key atop the fireplace in the ballroom. I quickly grasped it and held it in my hand, looking around now at the drab ballroom, sighing as I looked at the end table right where Sarah was standing by the window. I went back out to the hallway and opened the basement door finally, as it creaked open, to realize I wasn't going into a basement. I was going into a catacomb. The stairwell was large, grand, dim torches lighting up my pathway. I took one hanging off the wall to light my path, the cobblestones echoing, being the only footsteps I heard this time. It seems the house was no longer attempting to break me, but I did hear a heartbeat. It sounded soft, but as I moved down the corridor, the dim torchlight lighting my path, I could hear the sounds of dripping water as well. I kept walking. Before me, 3 keyholes, part of a large stone double door. I held the torch up. Of course, iron, bronze, and gold. I took the keys out, sliding each one in. As they turned, I heard the grinding of a large mechanism, and then the grinding of stone as the doors slid open. As the doors opened, pure darkness at first, before it was interrupted with a "Come!" My heart raced. This voice felt more menacing than the pirate captain, or even the demon. I paused before it commanded again, "Come!" the heartbeat sound growing louder now. The moment I stepped in, I saw several torches light. However, these torches were sheer blue, and I began to see just how large of a room I was in. Before me were large stone steps that descended into murky water as more torches lit. I could see in the water, about 30 meters in, a large mangrove tree, at least the roots in the trunk, with a man carved in it. I marveled at the sheer size of this, but once again the feeling of dread and despair before me. I had nothing that could help me against this entity. This large being. Everything I had faced in the mansion had been new territory for me as it is, but instinctively, I reloaded the flintlock pistol before stuffing it back in my jacket. Clearly, whoever or whatever this was impatient. It once again commanded, "Come!" I stepped to the bottom step. The water leading to the mangrove tree looked bottomless. I looked back at the tree. I could now see the mouth of the figure carved in it, commanding once again, "Come!" I took one trepidatious step into the murky abyss to find a stone slab about at calf height. It seemed I was meant to approach. As my eyes adjusted further, I saw an altar just before the carving in the tree. I waited further. As soon it got about halfway up to my thighs before I was just before the altar. I held my torch up and said clearly, attempting to mask the dread in my voice, "Who or what are you?" The carving on the tree said, "We are with the Master now. Now and forever." I commanded as best I could, "Who is your master?" The carving continued, "A generous host, the Lord of Light, the universe. We are Dercito. We are Jeremy Hartwood. We are Captain Ezekiel. We are Lucifer. He has given us everlasting life as part of something greater." I looked around as I remembered my experiences throughout this home. I certainly felt it wasn't just myself and one other person in this room. I took in what this thing said as I said, "Why have you tried to kill me up to this point?" The carving continued, "Because we feel your pain. We feel your anguish at your loss. How else were we able to replicate her face so well?" I let that sink in, as I couldn't look this thing in the eye anymore. I remembered that wonderful feeling of seeing Sarah again. The bliss of it all. The pain from losing her gone. Before I could answer further, it continued, "Do you want to be with her forever? You can be. All you need to do is sleep forever." As a root moved over the altar, it was clear I was going to be sacrificed. But I would have Sarah back. They brought her back for a few moments for me. And surely if I refused, I was in its lair. I would be killed. I paused, standing there, as it said, "Think about it, Edward Carnby. No longer will you be lost, afraid, and alone in the dark." I thought on everything. As I gripped my torch, I made my decision. I might be alone in the dark, but I'm not afraid, and I'm not lost. I have a light with me. As I reached to the oil lamp hanging from my belt, throwing it hard against the tree, coating it in oil as I let out a bellowing, "Go to hell!" As I threw my torch, the tree coming to light, as the entity screamed. Lunging from the water were several tentacles. As I surmised, this master wasn't going to let me leave peacefully. The tentacles grabbed me and dragged me into a deeper section of the water as the stone slab beneath my feet began descending. I only had an air full of breath as I attempted to thrash out. I heard growling beneath me. I couldn't move my arms very far. After about 30 seconds, my vision began to blur. Some of the blue flame torches in the altar room I could see were going out, as the tree only grew brighter. I began to realize that this was it. I would still be able to be with Sarah soon. But in that moment, I don't know if it was my delirium, or if I actually heard her, as she said, "Edward, is this what you want?" My eyes shot open as I reached into my coat, as that's how far my arms could go, as I stuck the flintlock pistol right next to the fleshy mass that was about to devour me and fired both shots, as I heard a warbled roar as the beast released me, and I madly swam to the surface, my lungs desperately straining my body and screaming for air, as I finally broke the surface of the water, taking my first desperate gasp for air. Narrowly escaping another grab from the creature, as everything around me was shaking and falling apart. I had to escape. Despite the entire night draining much from me, I sprinted to the top of the stairs of the basement. I felt the stairs falling away from me. I felt the door rumble as rubble fell against it. But I made it out. Daylight. Beautiful daylight. The excavation teams to this day of September 9th, 1924, are still attempting to dig everything out based on my report. I don't know how I survived that night, but I can confirm these events are 100% true. Regardless if the corpses of Jeremy Hartwood were gone, the corpse of that demon, the corpse of Captain Ezekiel was gone as well. Clearly, what I was up against, I took by surprise. As much as it took me by surprise by being far beyond what I had ever expected out of any haunted house. Many academies have rewarded me for my efforts at Dercito Manor that night. I have only taken minor jobs since then. I can never shake the feeling, however, that what I faced that night had never left me, that it wasn't done with me. But on some level, I'd have to be used to it. The spirit world endures far more than ours, in so many different ways. But I know now that I'm never going to be alone through it all. Sarah will always be with me. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to this. I deeply appreciate it. I worked very hard on writing it. 8 pages. I tried to have a very satisfactory beginning, middle, and end. If you're here at this point, once again, don't forget to click that like and subscribe button. And don't forget to follow me on other social media. And once again, if you want to help out the channel, follow me on Twitch and catch me on my Twitch streams. I would deeply, deeply appreciate it. Thank you very much, guys, and have a happy Halloween.